Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about ceilings, floors, and balance. With KR already having a balance patch and we're waiting for it here on Global, I figured now would be a good time to talk about this kind of stuff. By pure coincidence, Legalia made a tier list, which I can actually use as a reference for some of this. And I do have the DMs to show that I was thinking about this before he released that tier list. So none of that, he's just bandwagoning on a popular topic. Alright, doing the Mudahar thing where you cover your nose is kind of weird. I had to try it once and I'll probably do it again sometime. I should also mention that Agam made a tier list. I do mention it a few times in this video. I will link that in the description as well. You know, if you're a Lost Ark player, you've probably seen this by now, but again, I'm going to link it below just in case you haven't, which Legalias will be down there as well. But yeah, let's get into it. First one is the one that people are going to talk about the most, the one people have the most experience with. Everybody knows it, character ceiling. The ceiling of a character is what the character can do with nothing else considered. In terms of Lost Ark, that's disregarding things like gear and user error. This might sound a lot like a tier list, which is what exactly it is. So let's talk about two different examples. First off being the actual tier list, and because like I said, Legalia just made a tier list, we're going to look at his. At the start, he did specifically state that this is for KR endgame and Theamine, so he does consider things like back time and uptime and stuff like that for that fight. I think when a lot of people make tier lists or think a tier list, they're super general with it, and I think that's what causes a lot of disputes. And then the other example is the DPS simulations that we see occasionally on Reddit. So it's a similar concept, but it's more kind of like the Trixion version of it. It's what the class can self-do with basically perfect everything. So this kind of ceiling comparison disregards things like what boss or what gate or anything that's on. It's just purely what this class could do is if you were exactly perfect. So before moving forward, it's about time we talk about Shackles. This is a term coined by the Korean community, and honestly, I think the best way to explain it is just to give you examples and go from there. So something like positional attacks, so front or back attacks, that's a shackle. Not having much movement speed can be one. On top of that, things like certain types of skills can also be a shackle as well. So things like charge skills, for example, ones that require you to put supercharge on your engravings. Longer casting times or animations. Having tight burst windows characters can be a bit of a shackle as well, so like doing your double doomsdays or your triple cure opening kind of thing. Even just having to play around a specialty gauge can be considered a shackle. So there's something additional that you have to be doing or you should be doing, but they can also hold you back or hold you down from your potential, which is why it's a shackle. The reason why I'm talking about it now before moving forward is because it doesn't really affect the ceiling. Because remember, when people are talking about the peak, the ceiling, the tier list, all that kind of stuff, whatever, they're getting rid of human error. They're getting rid of the RNG, the anything else. So while the ceiling talks about being played perfectly, the following topics are not. To be honest, you can pretty much think of Shackles as a difficulty add-on. But that doesn't just mean the more shackles that you have to work around, the harder the class is. Some are easier to work around than others. We'll revisit that topic a little later in the video. So now we can move on to the character floor. Now technically the floor can always be 0. Somebody could somehow miss every skill, do absolutely nothing, or just die out the first mechanic. So when talking about the floor, it's like thinking about somebody who was there for the entire fight, they were attacking and all that kind of stuff, but then you keep in mind things like shackles, which is important why we talked about them first. Now I would say a general rule is the more shackles your classes has, the lower the floor is going to be. So let's take a look at a few classes. Let's take a quick look at Pistolier Deadeye. This is a non-positional class. There are, yes, back attack modifiers on some of his skills, but it's not enough to warrant using Entropy or having Ambush Master. The closest thing he has to a shackle is making sure you're properly using his dodge because it does give him a buff. Though I guess you could argue that he is a pretty squishy range class that has to play melee range. But beyond that, it's really just simple. It's just keep that buff up and just shoot him. So now we're going to jump over to Taijutsu Scrapper and talk about that. Now, unlike Pistolier, they get their movement speed off of just the swiftness stat. It's actually one of the more comfortable back attack classes that I've played. You do have a special gauge that you don't have to worry about it that much, but you are back attacking class, so that means back attack is giving you a good amount of your crit chance because you're running entropy set, and also you're running the Ambush Master engraving. So by design, by playstyle between these two, the floor is going to be a lot higher on something like Pistolier than it would be on a Tai Scrapper. Even though they are both classes that are like, hey, that skill is off cooldown, put it back on cooldown. The Pistolier can just fire away with little consequences. Now if a Tai Scrapper does this and they're not worrying about positioning, now they're losing a lot of damage because they're not using their Entropy set or their Ambush Master properly. And you really can't make a non-positional build because the skills themselves have a back attack modifier on them as well. So like trying to run a non-positional Scrapper would probably just lower your floor and your ceiling both at the same time, even though you're trying to raise your floor. And then we can also talk about our friend the Igniter Sword. Igniter is still capable of a lot of damage. It is still very powerful. However, they have a burst window in which they have to hit 2 Doomsdays, something that you push the button and it's not instant damage. So a lot of Igniters miss one or even both of their Doomsdays to a decent degree, which kind of gives them a bad rap these days. So now we've talked a little bit about floors and ceilings, let's take a quick look at kind of how the balancing meta has been in the past. Now I am an NA, I am a global Andy, so I don't have knowledge really about the game prior to our launch. So I'm really just going to talk about from our launch up to KR's current patch, because I do keep up with what's talking about over there. Because there are a lot of KR creators who make things for us global players. So at the very start of NA, I would have to say the meta would mostly be like Surge and Igniter. Burst classes offer that big dopamine hit, and also people just praise them really well. They did a lot back in the day. We even had that like 2 weeks of Shock Scrapper when everybody hyped over it after Stoops released a clip of him doing like some crits on it. But in general, it was kind of accepted that these burst classes were going to have the higher ceiling, and not only that, but their damage was just overall higher. Like they just brought more to the table. A lot of consistent classes back then didn't really bring that much damage, but there's also a lot to consider when you talk about this burst versus consistent meta. So we'll take a quick detour on that, because basically the longer the fight is, the better the chance the consistent damage classes is going to be able to keep up. But if something is on farm and you guys have a ton of damage and you're just pushing phase to phase, a consistent class is not going to be able to keep up, because they have to do constant rotations to keep up to just one surge. And I would say at this time of the game, in the early part of the game, it didn't take us too long to get to that point, so that even devalued consistent classes even more. So over time, it just really became our standard in our meta that if you played a burst class, you're playing one of the better classes, as opposed to these ZDPS consistent damage classes. Because I remember the days of gatekeeping scouters, well, being the scouter that got gatekept from even just Guardian raids. So it really wouldn't be until the reworks that this kind of opinion, this kind of thought started to change, along with just newer classes as well. So examples of this would be Emperor Arcana, Sharpshooter, AT Scouter, the release of Slayer and Soul Eater. So Emperor, AT, Deathstrike, Predator, Knight's Edge. These are all classes that are consistent damage classes and also are considered to have a very high ceiling. Then we get to KR's latest patch, which First Intention has been seen as a broken tier class. Like it is just there near the top. Still not the top, but still it's really high up there for being a very non-demanding class. A class without barely any shackles. It basically only has Dominion to worry about. Which is still annoying, don't get me wrong, because then you have to deal with CGA timing and stuff like that with your ult. Which is going to lead us towards our next topic. Who really deserves to be quote-unquote top tier or S tier? I have a friend who will argue day and night that RE Deathblade is for stupid people who can't play Surge. And there's always going to be just insane people like that who are just absolutely biased but don't think they are, just because they want to gas up whatever they play. They just feel like they had to be the most important, the best, and all that kind of stuff. But then also Legalia says, why is Surge best when it's a 1 to 3 gem class that's very easy to play now? Agam said that only like 20 people in the world, he thinks, could play Deathblade RE to its ceiling. To have the constant uptime that you need for RE to keep up with Surge, along with the change that you can no longer run Dark Axle really. RE is described as extremely demanding from a lot of people who play it in KR, but it's just not practical to hit the ceiling with it. So even though it's capable of S tier, Agam said it generally performs around a B tier. Now even though both specs of DB run around the same Shackles, it's much easier to hit 3 back attacks than it is to hit like 5 or 6. When that friend of mine tried to argue that Surge was harder to play, he actually mentioned that another Deathblade player is better than them at Deathblade, but they do less damage than their Surge as an RE. When them trying to say that Surge is harder, they unironically just called themselves out, saying that yes, I do more damage as a Surge than a better player playing RE. Now this doesn't mean that burst back attackers are easier in general than a static back attacker. For example, Predator Slayer is probably the easiest back attacker to exist in the game, and is a swiftness, consistent damage back attacker. I basically just wanted to talk about Surge because I'm sick of people making this argument, and now with players like Agam even talking about it, now I have some ammo with this gun. A credible source as opposed to this is my theory.
It is really hard class engraving to give tier because early blade, well played player can do S tier, but in near, it is hard to play seriously, like DPS checking in near lane. I think the player who can use early blade as S tier is less than 20 players in world. So, and in near, 90% of early blade user will use this class as B. So, in my thinking the highest point of early blade, I should give S, but lowest point of early blade, we give him B. But in here, that 10% of users will be the most thinking case I should think, because I will give him early A.
Well, Surge is at the top. Yippity yay. Dude, it's just crazy. They decided to give the stacking system a complete overhaul. You can get 60 stacks and your surge literally does double the damage. You stack so fast now, guys. And it's much easier to play compared to remaining energy. 1 gem class, again, keep buffing them 1 gem classes, boys. I mean, it's not actually a 1 gem class now, it's 3 gems. Whoa. 3 and not 7. Cool.
And going back, earlier I talked about how good First Intention War Dancer is now. It raised another concern from people that, hey, this class is like super brain dead and yet it's pumping out so much damage. Is that right? Is that fair? And if you don't think that's fair, then you should agree that RE should do more damage than Surge because you had to do so much more work on it. Then it should be a noticeable difference, not just that, hey, yeah, they're both an S tier. But I also want to say that I have no fucking leg in this race. I don't play Deathblade really at all. It's never been a roster character since like Vulcan. But another sort of balance that people don't think about is the investment in the character. Why should this 1 to 3 gem class be the top? Why should it outdo damage than somebody who has to buy 6 or 7 damage gems? I think reducing the gap that we thought we had between burst and consistent is a good thing. I don't think people should be alienated for liking a certain type of playstyle more than others, especially when they had to spend like 2 to 3 times more gold on gems. And yes, I know there is the spec tax, spec accessories are going to cost you more, but a Swift class is still going to cost you more in the long run. And by long run, I mean just level 10 gems, because it's like 3 cooldown gems are the price of 1 level 10 damage gem. Now, there are exceptions. There are spec burst classes that do require more than like 3 gems. Igniter Sork is one of those examples that it could use like 5 or 6, I think. But I'm going to be honest here, like a little off topic. Igniter Sork, or Sork in general, is one of the classes that needs reworked the most. Overall, I don't really think Smilegate knows what they're doing with balance. I don't think they have a philosophy or an idea that they're really trying to chase. Overall, right now, yes, back attackers are eating good, but you gotta keep in mind they are about to delete entropy sets, so everything's gonna change. There's gonna be a huge shift in the meta soon, most likely, but a choice they made in the past has me kind of confused on what they're doing. A while back, they nerfed Aeromancer because they said that it's too strong. Like, basically, it's performing more than they want. This is a class that, like, what people thought was like a high mid. Their concept is they wanted it to really be a support DPS. Fine. Another class that offers a good amount of buff uptime and really good buffs? War Dancer. Basically, for a while, you could consider Aeromancer just a better War Dancer. Right now in KR, like, War Dancer's just twerking all over this little IAEA. Now, obviously, they don't run the same buff, so it's not like they're competing for the same buffs. But still, you're considering now a buff bot with minor damage or a buff bot with just big dick damage. Once that patch hits, you're picking up a War Dancer. Like, if you see it, you're gonna be like, if he's first attention, he's in. The class is not hard to play. It shits out damage, and it's got good buffs, good synergy, crazy uptime. So when I consider things like that, it just really feels like they don't really know the direction they're going with this. They're just trying to lower the bottom classes to be up with the top for the sake of the content, and who knows, maybe they want you to swipe a little more and pick up one of these classes. So that should be it for this video, and I want to just, say a few things here. One, difficulty is subjective. In every game, there are going to be different types of difficulties, and somebody's going to be able to handle other ones better than others. So don't take everything I said as like an absolute or anything like that. These are just my opinions, my thoughts on all these kind of things. And I kind of apologize for picking on Deathblade players a lot in this video. I still like you more than Igniter Sorks. Feel free to spit some bars, pop off a little bit in the comments about what you think should make a strong class. What should make an S tier class besides, hey, I play it. Oh yeah, hit me with that like and sub. I'll catch you next time.